In this video, we're creating a whole bunch of depth to our code by using functions and creating our own functions to encapsulate our statements so that when we push up, 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 it all works correctly. Hit enter, the game starts all over again, and we can hit down, 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 enter, and it's putting in the correct numbers at the correct time to create a full game loop. So let's jump in and get our game completed. When we look at our start function here, you can see there's a lot going on. And just a reminder, I'm going to be using the words function and method pretty much interchangeably. For this video, I'll stick with function so that we've just got the one so we're not bouncing around too much. But I tend to say method a bunch as well. We have our start function. There's a lot going on here. What I'm going to do is create another function that allows us to encapsulate these statements, this information. Okay, and we'll talk about encapsulation a bunch in this video. So if you come down underneath your start function, give yourself a couple of extra spaces and type void start game, capital S, capital G for start game, and open brackets, and it will close them automatically. Next line, open curly braces, and enter. We have the structure and the shape of a function. So what are we doing here? What are we doing when we're creating a new function? Let me give you a little bit of context. So here's how we write a function. Here's our function definition. Function we can think of like a contract. It's a recipe, it's a contract, it's things that we want to have happen. And like our variables, naming is important for functions because it's doing a thing. We want to make sure we have doing words in there, descriptive words that are verbs. So this is start game. And it's telling us what to do. Also, we have the brackets down the end is where we put parameters. At the moment, we don't have anything inside the bracket, so it's doing nothing. We're going to talk a lot more about parameters in upcoming sections, but for now, just know that we don't have any parameters for our very simple definition we're creating here. And at the start, we have the word void. And the word void could be replaced with other things. Again, in the future, we'll talk about that a bunch more. For now, we just need to know that void means that there's no return value. When I shout out start game, it's not shouting anything back to me saying, you want to know the number 7. There's nothing at the moment that is being returned. So that's why we put in void. And in future content, we'll be having return values, but for now we don't need that. We're just saying void, start game, and brackets. And then underneath our void start game, we have our open curly braces, all the statements that we want to contain, the ingredients of our recipe, and then close curly brackets, or curly braces, technically they're called. Let's jump back over in here. I don't have a big challenge slide for you in this lecture. I've just got a couple of mini challenges. My mini challenge here is to take all of the content from our start function and put it into our start game function. So pause the video and transfer that information in there now. Okay, so we can just highlight, do a Control X or Command X if you're on the Mac, and make sure we indent and then paste in there. So now all of this content is in start game. And if we save and jump back over into Unity, start the game now, we'll see that none of our instructions will appear on the screen. Taking a moment to think about it, there we go, there's nothing there. And that's because, out of play mode, that's because we're not calling this function anywhere. What calling it means is to say, I want you to do this now. Literally, it's like, hey, start game. And the place that we can do that is in our start function. We know that start will be called because that's part of Unity's underlying system. Start always gets called if we have start in there. We don't need to call start. Unity Engine will call start. But we need to call our start game because that's a function that we've created. So we can say very simply in here, start game. Or we type in here, we don't say it, we type it, start game, and then semicolon, because it's a statement. So written the same way. This is saying, I want you to do start game. What is that? Well, we come down here, and all of these statements will be executed. So it's exactly the same functionality as when we had them all in there, but it tidies it up. It encapsulates it. So now when we look at start, what happens when we start our game? It does the start game. It's like, oh yes, I know start game gives the instructions. And then if we need to go and find out the details, we can come down here and have a look, but we're not bombarded with them right at the very start. So it's a really lovely way for us to organize our code, keep everything very readable, and to encapsulate. What is encapsulate, I hear you say? Moving code into a function is encapsulating it. That's what we're doing with that process. And think of encapsulating. You're putting it in a capsule, essentially. Or we can see it as a black box. So we look back here. Here is our black box. And there's a bunch of stuff that happens in there. If we're content that that's going well, we don't need to dig into the black box. All we need to know is that we're saying start the game. And it enables us to let go of the how. So the point I've made a couple of times now is, all we need to know is that we have to start the game, and that's when all the instructions happen. How is that happening? Well, we either taken care of that previously, or we don't need to know about it right now. It lets us not get swamped in all of the details at every step of our journey. And the general process of what we're doing here as well is called refactoring. The reason we refactor is to make our code readable. Easy to read code is huge in programming. Super important. You'll see throughout this entire course, we spend a lot of time on naming and a lot of time on having our code readable. If you have readable code, it makes bug finding way easier, bug solving way easier, and it makes the whole process of creating your product, creating your game more enjoyable. Now that we've created one function with our encapsulating, let's create a second. And a really good clue for when we should look to create a function is when you see repeated code. So this line of code is exactly the same as that line of code, which means we could refactor that. We could factor that out. Let's scoot down the bottom of our script, the second last curly bracket, hit enter. So we still have one curly bracket. You can see this one relates to the one at the very top of our class up there. That one and that one, so we're putting it in between the last and the second last curly bracket. And you start with void, because again, we have no return type. We will call this next guess, open and close parentheses, and then open and close curly brackets. And here's the next challenge I have for you, is within our code, in our if statements here, to take the two lines of code, to refactor them into next guess, and then to substitute where those lines of code were for our function of next guess, just like we did up the top here. So pause the video and do that refactoring, that encapsulating now. Okay, hopefully that went well for you. We need to take these two lines of code. I'll just X them out, Control X, paste them down in here. Now we have our next guess as a function. I'll add next guess, and you can see the autocomplete knows it should be auto-completed. It's got a squiggly line because we need to have our open and close brackets to say that there's no parameters, and then a semicolon at the end. We'll do exactly the same here. I don't need to copy and paste this because we already have it. I don't need to go and again put that down the bottom. I can just type in, if I do it correctly, tab, next guess, it auto-completed for me, open and close brackets and semicolon. So now we have our next guess, we have our encapsulation for start game. Let's save, hop back over into Unity, make sure this works. Don't want to pat ourselves on the back just yet. Let's pat ourselves on the back in a moment if this all works. Hit play. You can see the instructions are coming in. If I hit up, it's taking me up. If I hit down, it's taking me down. And it's giving us the instructions as we want it to. So this process, we've made our code a lot cleaner. And we're developing a really good habit for how we can make beautiful code moving forward when our projects get gigantic and huge, which I know yours will as you make bigger and huger and more awesome games. The last thing we want to do in this lecture, I'll push through this nice and quickly, so bear with us here, is to see what's going on when we try to restart our game. So let's say up, and then enter, you got it correct, and then that's it, up and down, it's still trying to guess from the same place. What we need to do is a question for you in terms of our challenge. What do we need to do in here? What would we do to have our game start again when you say, I have won the game, when you say you've got it correct? What would we need to call to start the game again? Okay, if you guessed start game, then you would be correct. So I'm going to trot all the way down the bottom here to my else if for did you get it correct, where we have our key code return. I'm going to type in start game, open close brackets, semicolon, and then save, jump back over into Unity, click on play, and then up, enter, and then we get all our instructions over again. It's a lot to look at in here. The console's not really made for this kind of stuff. It's so that we can practice our C# without having to worry about all the Unity interface just yet, but we can see that that is successful, that our instructions are being reprinted. But tell me if your number is higher and lower than 938 and the highest number you can pick is 1001. That doesn't make sense. So success on getting instructions in there, but not success in terms of having our numbers correct. Let's jump back into our script and see what's going on here. If we look at the logic of what's happening here, when we start our start function and say start the game, we're going through all of our intro text and we're saying print out the max. And the max, when we very first declare them and initialize them, is 1000. But throughout our game, we're changing what the max is. So in here, we're saying the max equals the guess. if we've pushed up a few times. And then when we say start the game again, it will say, okay, cool, I'll start the game, and it's remembering our max level. So then within start game, we need to be putting our values back to where we want them in the original sense. So let's give ourselves a little bit of space at the top of start game and say max equals 1000, min equals 1, and guess, you guessed it, equals 500. And just a quick note, when we're defining our variables in here, we don't need to say int again. We've already declared, it already knows that this is an integer. We've already told it that up here at our member values, up here at our member variables. So all we need to do down here in our local variables is just to say, well, max, which we already know is of type int, should be 1000. We could remove this up here and say, well, we don't actually need to have any values at the start because we will be defining them straight away in start game. We'll hit save, jump back over into our build, click on play, and just make sure you have collapse turned off or else everything gets bunched up together. It's hard to see what's going on. We'll hit up, 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 enter, and it starts everything again. 1000, 500, great, down, 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 enter, 1000, 500, fantastic. So we've created a full game loop here where our game starts, gives us the correct numbers, we can replay it again. We've talked about having our variables within our newly created start game function. We're calling our start game function from start. We've created a new function for next guess that's allowed us to encapsulate this information, these statements down here, makes our else statements, our if and our else if statements cleaner. So now we're just saying next guess and start game. And our whole loop is complete. So well done. Huge congratulations on working through this section. Give yourself a huge high five and a pat on the back because you have created something that is very excellent. You've created working code and a working game mechanic. Great work. I'll see you in an upcoming video.